It is. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome and thank you for being here with us this 4th of July weekend where we celebrate the independence of the United States of America from England. But more importantly, we are celebrating the evolution of human consciousness into a spirit of independence and freedom. We're going to talk about that today. We don't want to look at the Declaration of Independence as a one-time thing that happened a long, long time ago, but it is something that is constantly unfolding. Remember last week we talked about updating the mythology, time to update the mythology, that there is this something that is expanding and expressing through the evolution of human consciousness that periodically makes a shift and creates a new mythology, the mythology being the value system, the rules, the regulations, the things that are important, who we believe we are. And we can consider this step, this visible step of the proclamation of the Declaration of Independence, we can consider that as one milestone, one step amongst many in which the human spirit starts to recognize and accept its own power, I'm going to recommend a little booklet to you. I didn't think of it last night when I sent out the email where I would have included it, but it's easy to remember. It's by Emmett Fox. Remember we talked about Emmett Fox a few weeks ago. Actually talked about him for several weeks. Emmett Fox. And the title of the booklet is The Manifest Destiny of the United States of America. And it's available in ebook format for 99 cents. I got it on Amazon this morning. It's on Google Play. It's on the Apple Store. The Manifest Destiny of the United States by Emmett Fox. Short pamphlet, good read, cost you $1. Well worth to follow up this afternoon, to follow up the ideas in this talk. So as we discussed last week, and as we discuss from time to time, I want you to take a step back and take a big step back. Somebody sent me a computer simulation last week, and it's the universe. And what the simulation allows you to do is you can travel through space, the part of space that's mapped, the part of space that we know, and you can see just how vast the universe is. Go to the internet and go to the page for the Hubble telescope and look at the images. Look at the images and see just how vast this universe is. Just how long it's been here. Scientists will tell us almost 5 billion years, over 4 billion years, maybe 4.8 billion years. Now that is mind-boggling, and by that I mean we can't comprehend that. You and I as human beings, we can't comprehend that. 100 years is a good lifespan, a long lifespan on this planet. How many times does 100 go into 4.8 billion? How many lifetimes would that be? That if we were here over and over and over again, how many lifetimes would that be? Just to observe 4.8 billion years. Our mind can't understand that. That's important. We can't understand that. We don't have the capacity to understand it. Yet it is. It is. Right? And the universe is expanding, we're told. The universe is expanding. And my question is, what is it expanding into? If the universe is expanding, what was there beyond the universe to begin with? Is there something else out there that we're expanding into? If we could build a telescope powerful enough to see all the way to the edge of the universe, what would we see? What would be beyond there? I laughingly suggest that there would be a big sign that says the universe ends here. And what I'm trying to get across is this constant expansion of what is, and we don't know into what is yet to come, but there's something already there. Now, one article I read said, well, the universe isn't expanding into anything; it's just expanding. That everything is just getting bigger, you know, and that's mind blowing too. Because as long as the relative dimensions remain the same, we wouldn't know, you know, we wouldn't know. So what we're measuring as 12 inches to be a foot. Well, you know, that's relative to that ruler. But if the ruler is getting bigger and and the room is getting bigger and we're getting bigger, we would never know. We would never know. And I just want to throw out some ideas of awe, you know, of wow. You know, we don't think about these things, but the physical universe is expanding, and it has been expanding according to Big Bang Theory, at least. It has been expanding for billions of years, and the speed at which it is expanding is also mind-boggling. We certainly can't ride our bike that fast. The planet that we're on right now, you and I, you know, it's rotating. If you were standing at the equator, you're moving at 1,000 miles an hour as the Earth rotates, right? 24 hours in a day, and it goes 25,000 miles, a little over 1,000 miles an hour. The planet is moving around the sun is moving in the galaxy is moving in the universe, and the universe itself is moving. Everything is expanding. Now consciousness, this awareness, this thing we call consciousness, which we really don't know what it is, it too is evolving. So we can see a pattern. When we talk about biological evolution, we can see a pattern in that as each stage of life advanced, you know, as there was an advance in evolution, there were two things that increased. With every stage, the intellectual capacity of the species increased, a little bit smarter, a little bit able to figure things out, and mobility increased. And for mobility, let's say freedom increased. So, you know, life started as a little single-celled animal, for example, and it just kind of floated around wherever it was. You know, it didn't have any means of propulsion. It just was there. And then, of course, eventually it developed a means to move, whether it be in the form of a worm that could slither, or the form of a fish, or plants that can turn. It amazes me how the plants turn their leaves to follow the sun. There's not too far from here, there's a wildlife management area, and every year the government goes in and plants a huge field of sunflowers, and the local photographers love to go there and take them. And we had some in our garden back in Hickory many years ago, and it was just amazing to watch that sunflower turn and follow the sun during the day. Locomotion, the ability to move. So we can see that with every iteration, and these things take, you know, thousands, if not millions of years, but with every iteration, we are moving to a next level or another level of intelligence, to another level of freedom of mobility. Dr. Holmes asks us to consider if the logical outcome then is not going to be that at some point we're not going to need a physical means of locomotion. You know, we think about this. We went from crawling on all fours to walking on 2 feet, and then we learned how to domesticate animals and either ride them or have them pull a cart after somebody figured out how to make a wheel that, you know, that would go on the cart. And then later we learned how to put means of propulsion on the craft, whether it be a sail, you know, or whether it be some type of an engine that would move it along. And then we built these massive ships that could cross the ocean, again, powered by oars. Remember the Viking ships? They had a sail and they had oars. And then wind, and then steam, you know, and then coal, and then oil, and now nuclear power. So there's an evolution. There's an evolution to this mobility. There's an evolution to this freedom. And we want to consider that that is what the Declaration of Independence is about. It is a point in time when human consciousness reached a different level of acceptance of the freedom that is already here, the freedom that is our birthright. Now, I think it's important for us to remember that as the universe was evolving, the principles by which things work, they have always existed. They have always been there. You know, it was possible thousands of years ago, tens of thousands of years ago. It was possible to tap into nuclear power. But people did not have the capacity, the intellectual capacity to discover that. It was possible for Moses to have a flashlight when he led the Israelites across the desert instead of a post with fire on the top of it. But the human consciousness had not yet evolved to the point where it discovered the laws of electricity and then tamed them, then learned how to use them. So I want you to think about that process, right? The principle exists. Gravity exists. But we have to discover how it works, and we have to discover how to work with it. And the simplest, probably one of the simplest forms of that I can think of is water wheels. Gravity pushes the water down the stream. We don't have to know why that water is moving down the stream. Go back tens of thousands of years. We don't have to know what pushes the water down the stream. We don't have to have a mathematical formula. But the human beings realized that they could somehow capture that flowing water and the force of it and put it to work and make it turn a wheel and make that wheel grind the meal and things like that. The principle of gravity was always there. People kind of stepped into learning how to work with it. For example, with a water wheel. But then later on, that understanding got a little bit deeper. When Newton came along, he was able to find a different way of thinking in terms of mathematics to be able to describe it. Now, we still don't know what gravity is. We still don't know how it works. We know it works. We can describe with mathematical accuracy how it works. In the book I was quoting from Joseph Campbell last week, he said, we knew when we went to the moon, we knew exactly how long we had to burn the rockets to get that lunar lander down to the surface. We knew exactly how long we had to burn them to get it off the surface. We were able to bring that Apollo craft back to the planet Earth and drop it. Think about this. We dropped it in the ocean within a mile with a recovery ship because we knew how the principle of gravity worked. Not why it works, but how it works. So human consciousness evolves and it discovers something that is already there and then figures out, well, what can we do with this? How can we use this? So I want you to kind of think of that image of traveling through space. Think of that image of the universe is expanding. And you and I, like Holmes says, you and I are spiritual adventurers, spiritual explorers in the in the unexplored territory of mind, of consciousness. And human consciousness is expanding. And in that idea of human consciousness expanding, not only has evolution taken us physically to the point where the intellectual capacity has expanded, and we have been able to use that intellectual capacity to develop machinery to help us improve our mobility to the point where we could go to the moon. But the idea of who we are and what we are, our personal mythology. If you didn't catch the talk last week, it's on YouTube. Go back and catch up on it. Our personal understanding of who and what we are is constantly unfolding. The divine already is, divine love already is, divine power already is, divine peace already is. We talked about the 7 main aspects of God. They already are. But what has to happen is that you and I, human beings, we have to develop the ability to accept and to receive and to cooperate with and to work with those principles that already are, that already exist. So if you look kind of at, as an anthropologist might look, if you kind of look at how different societies have evolved over time and the concepts of the people and the concepts of the self and the concepts of other, you can see that at some point human consciousness, self-awareness, the ability to be aware of our thoughts, the ability to have concepts about things, it came into being somewhere along the line, somewhere along the course of evolution. It came into being. And we have been wrestling with that. What does that mean? Who am I? Why am I here? What does that mean? This is kind of a burning question. And I think the questions that we ask define our lives. And when I have been working with people in an environment where they wanted to change, pretty much what I would do is teach them to ask better questions, different questions. And it's the deep inquiry, the deep asking that sort of gets us to move that next step, sort of gets us to go the next step of evolution. Now, Thomas Troward, in his work, he tells us that biological evolution has done all it can for us. Dr. Holmes restates it very much the same way. Evolution was a process. There's involution and there's evolution. Involution is what starts it. Involution is when the divine speaks its word and says, let there be. Evolution is the process by which that unfolds. If you bring that down into our own lives, we are constantly speaking our own words, let it be. And our life is unfolding. So we are, there's a macrocosm and the microcosm. There's the big and there's the little. But what Troward tells us is that once we have reached the point of self-awareness and that concept of self-awareness has stepped into what he calls the 5th kingdom, the spiritual kingdom. You have the mineral, you have the vegetable, the animal, the human, and then the spiritual kingdom. Once we step into that spiritual kingdom, once we understand that we live in a spiritual universe, and that it is done to us according to our belief, and that our word has power, it shall not return unto us void, according to Isaiah. Our bread is cast upon the waters, and it shall return unto us. It is done unto us according to our belief. As you think and believe in your heart, so are you. All of these different ways of stating it, once we come into the realization that this is a spiritual universe, we are spiritual beings, and our belief has the ability to act upon something, or something has the ability to act upon our belief, then we must deliberately use that, to accept that principle, to work with that principle, in order to bring our lives into a different set of circumstances. Just as the early experimenters, Faraday and Maxwell and these folks had to discover electricity, which was always there, but were able to put it into some type of understanding. They had to develop the intellectual capacity to understand it. And then Edison came along, very pragmatic man, and says, well, what can we do with this? How can we use it? It's nice to go in a laboratory and do little things, but how can we use it? And he came up with the idea of if he could improve the electric light bulb, which other people had been working on but unsuccessfully. Edison believed if he could develop that light bulb, he could sell electricity. He could electrify the world. And he did. He did. Now he and Tesla had different views as to how that should be delivered, and Tesla's views won for the time being. As we move into solar energy, people going off the grid, now we're going back to Edison's original idea of direct current, making electricity and storing it in batteries. But my point is that electricity has always been there, and the human consciousness about electricity had to evolve. But it wasn't enough to evolve. As Wendy said in the opening, it's not enough to just have the story. It's not enough to just say, hey, you know what? Other people in other countries, they have this thing called electricity, and they're using it to light their homes. We have to apply. We have to be pragmatic, like Edison. We have to take it and put it to work in our own lives. So if you look back at the course of human history, you can kind of see this idea of the independence, the right to independence, the right to freedom, the right to self-governance of the individual has slowly been unfolding, We might have gone from tribal systems when we were all just starting out, and perhaps in terms of survival, that gave us the best chance of surviving. Specialization of work, and some people hunted and some people made things, and some people were the guards and the warriors and all of that. And as I said last week in the mythology, our identity was with that tribe. There was a sense of us and them. And as the Buddhists tell us, when we start to come into our own being, we tend to define ourselves in terms of what we're not. So we suddenly, you can imagine, we suddenly come into this idea of self-consciousness. We start to consider, who am I? But we don't have a frame of reference to answer that. So we start to define ourselves in terms of what we're not. We're not like those people over there. We're not them. The otherness creeps in. But eventually that otherness must go away. You see, eventually the sense of self and otherness must go away, because within the divine there is no sense of self and other. And what we are unfolding into, I ask what the universe is expanding into. What is our consciousness unfolding into? What is our consciousness expanding into? Our consciousness is expanding into a greater understanding, a greater experience, a greater realization of the presence of God, which is all-inclusive. There is no otherness in the divine mind. There cannot be, because God is all there is. God is all there is. So we saw that, we kind of went through the, evolved out of the sense of the different tribes. We had the Roman Empire come along as far as European history is concerned, and it rose up and it collapsed, and then there was kind of this void. I remember I was talking a few weeks ago about in the chaos, in the void, in the middle, in the confusion, the seed for something new is sown, the seed for something new, and then something new comes out of it. And then we came up with the feudal system, and that lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. And Emmett Fox says it actually lasted until the end of World War I. But along the way, as things were moving along, if you look kind of at the history of the law, along the way, people started to get this other idea. So instead of the ruler just being appointed by God to rule over these people who had absolute authority and absolute will over whether they lived or died or what they did, and they only lived, to please the monarch, evolved this idea that, wait a second, the government should rule with the consent of the governed. There should be, instead of just an arbitrary decision by the ultimate ruler, there should be trial by jury. There should be laws, you see, there should be agreements, there should be things that people understand that would treat the individual more as a being with the ability to think, the ability to choose, the ability to decide. And this was slowly evolving throughout history, and as Emmett Fox says, the feudal system was slowly collapsing. But what happened when the Europeans came to this continent, there's a couple of things that happened, They were very far removed from the absolute control of the monarchy. They had to make their own way in many cases, And there's this spirit of deciding for themselves. Now, something very interesting happens in human consciousness. When human migration exceeds the ability of the establishment to control, to impose its mythology upon the people create new mythologies. The people expand their ideas. And this this idea first came to me through a book. I think it's called Alternate Religions and the American Medical Experience, or something like that. I can't remember the exact name. But the idea was that as people expanded beyond the reach of the doctors and the official priests of the church, who in many cases were the doctor, they had to, if they wanted healing, they had to go to somebody who had a different way of believing. And frequently this new way of believing would become a new religion. So when the Erie Canal opened, let me back up a little bit. When this continent started to open for expansion, we had a lot of immigrants from Germany first, and then from Northern Ireland, the Scots-Irish afterwards. And they were not of the official English church. They were not of the Episcopal Church. And when these people got here, and they started to come down the Great Wagon Road from Pennsylvania down to where we are in South Carolina, the clergy could not move fast enough with them. The official clergy could not move fast enough with them. And they created their own denominations. They created new religions that did not require the preachers to go to a seminary, because seminaries weren't allowed. The only seminaries that were allowed in the colonies were the Episcopal Church was the official church. So when people got away from the establishment, they started to think for themselves, you see. Similar thing happened when the Erie Canal opened in the 1820s, and Western New York opened for expansion. The authorities couldn't go fast enough to be with the people. The official churches could not go fast enough to be with the people. And we had almost an explosion of new religions, new American religions just arising in that area at that time. Seventh-day Adventist Church, the Mormon Church rose up there. Spiritualism rose up there. So the point of that is that when people get away from the power and control of the authority, they start to think for themselves. Now everything they think may not be true, may not be accurate, but they start to think for themselves. They start to develop a different intellectual capacity. So if we look at the Declaration of Independence, what we want to consider is that the divine birthright of freedom, the divine birthright of each and every one of us choosing for ourselves and deciding for ourselves the life that we would lead and how we would express this divine love, it has always been there. It has always been a part of creation. That which is perfectly free could not create us in bondage, as Dr. Holmes tells us, and leave us bound. He tells us to think that the Creator would create us in bondage and leave us bound is to dishonor the Creator. But you see, there's something that we have to do. There's something that we have to do because we have been created in bondage. And humans have developed great mythologies about that over the years. Well, this is a punishment. This is a fall from grace. We've been kicked out of the garden, and all of these kind of things. And today I just want to suggest to you something that we've suggested many times over, and it's not a punishment. We had to forget. We had to have, as the Hindu teaching was, we had to have ignorance heaped upon us so that we could rediscover the greatness. We could rediscover in some unique way, some wonderful way, we could rediscover the magnificence of what the divine as us is. If we had all come into this world completely enlightened, there would be no room to expand. There would be no room to develop further. In Jewish mysticism, when we were studying the Kabbalah, the way that the rabbi described it, I thought was so beautiful. Now, I can't tell you that this is actually what happened. It's a way of understanding. But he says the divine The divine being all, the divine having all, it lacked nothing. It needed nothing. It does not create out of a sense of need. You know, you and I grow a garden because we need to eat. The divine doesn't have to do that. The divine is everything. So having everything, it did not receive. It could not receive anything. So it wanted to give. It wanted to give. And it had to create something that would be able to receive. And that was the human soul. And when it created the vessel, they called it the vessel. But when they created the human soul said, my purpose for living is as an inlet and an outlet for the divine. I must receive from the divine. I must receive from the divine, and the divine will have joy in giving of itself to me. Again, this is my recollection of the mythology of the Kabbalah as the rabbi we listened to explained it. So the human beings said, well, wait a second, you know, we're already full. We're in the divine presence. We are already here. We are already full. We have everything we need. How are we going to receive if we're already full? They said, well, we must empty ourselves out. So the vessels tried to empty themselves out, you know, and I don't know if you've ever lived close to the water, but there's times when the boats I had were taking on water, we had to bail so fast to keep them afloat that it looked like a Three Stooges cartoon. So I get this image of, you know, just bail, bail, bail. And the vessels tried to empty themselves out. But as fast as they emptied themselves out, the divine resupplied them. The divine replenished them. And they bailed and they bailed and they bailed and they emptied and they emptied and they emptied until they cracked. So the first act of creation didn't go so well. I created a vessel that was created to receive, but because it was in such close proximity, in such close contact with the divine, that it could not empty itself fast enough. So the souls got together and said, you know what, we need to remove ourselves from the immediate presence of the divine. We need to leave the garden. So the Garden of Eden in this mythology is not here on planet Earth, but it is some previous place. And they said, we need to go have a space-time existence. We need to go someplace where we seem to be separated from the divine. And there we can empty ourselves out, and then we can let the divine slowly refill us for its joy. So that is one way of explaining this ignorance that is heaped upon us. We deliberately chose to leave the garden, to leave the intimate proximity of the divine, and to come and figure it out slowly, so that the divine can slowly reveal itself to us and we can slowly discover it. So I want you to keep that mythology, keep that image in mind, right? So we are not being punished so much as we have chosen to forego the knowledge so that we could rediscover it, and in so doing the divine could have the joy of rediscovering itself in us, as us, and through us. Just keep that worldview in mind. Just keep that in mind. I love it. I think it's a beautiful way of explaining our situation. So we human beings, we human consciousness, we have slowly been growing into this deeper awareness of who and what we are and what the aspects of God are and how they express through us. But it is a process that is unfolding. It is a process that is unfolding. And it is there, but human beings have to evolve, have to advance to the point of accepting that which is already there. And this idea, what happened is when the Europeans came and settled on the east coast of what is now the United States, they were far removed from the reaches of the authority in England. And they were able to start to think for themselves. And then this idea of, hey, wait a minute, we should be able to think for ourselves. We should be able to decide for ourselves. We should be able to declare our independence. We don't need somebody 3,000 miles away who doesn't know what's going on to decide for us. We are perfectly capable of making those decisions for ourselves. And this then, you know, in a paraphrasing way, this then became the Declaration of Independence. Now, the Declaration of Independence we know is not perfect. This morning, by the way, I discovered something I didn't know, which was in one of Jefferson's original drafts, he had a complete paragraph against slavery. That was something that he wanted in there. That one of the crimes that the king committed was slavery, and it didn't last. Right, the document was wordsmithed by a bunch of people. So when the founding fathers, as we call them, said that all men are created equal, they didn't mean, in practice, they didn't mean all men. Right? It didn't include African Americans. It didn't include Native Americans. It didn't include women. It didn't include some immigrants as they come over. Benjamin Franklin was very concerned about the number of German immigrants who came over and who weren't being assimilated into our society, whatever that was. And then later when the Irish came, there were places that considered that the Irish weren't quite real citizens. They weren't quite real people. So that sense of us and them continued, but it was wrong. You see, it was wrong. So what has happened is the principles that were declared in the Declaration of Independence are still unfolding. See, I think it was a beautiful example of affirmative prayer. They started out by saying, what do we know about God and as it relates to us? And they said, we are endowed by the Creator. So how could the Creator endow us with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness if the Creator did not already have those things? It wasn't already those things. See? So if we were doing it today in a spiritual mind treatment, we would say, there's this thing called God. It is all that it is, and it is perfectly free. It is completely alive. One of the 7 main aspects, the first one was life. And it is completely happy. It is completely satisfied. It is completely joyful. In fact, it creates what it creates for its own enjoyment. And we are one with that. It has created us as its unique individualized expression of that freedom. So we declare that for ourselves. We accept that for ourselves. And then the next step, what they did was, of course, they listed their grievances with the king. But then they declared what they were ready to accept, you see. Are you ready to accept your freedom? They declared that they were ready to self-govern. But it didn't end there. You see, it didn't end there. They knew that they had to move their feet. The Amish say, pray and move your feet. In New Thought, we say, treat and move your feet. They had to put it into action. They had to be willing to put it into action. John Adams supposedly said that, if we fail in this revolution, I pray that they grease the rope before they hang us. They knew that they were committing their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors to this ideal that they had the right to decide for themselves. And then they had to do what they had to do. They went to war. Sometimes this change does not come about easily. Sometimes there's a struggle, right? And I'm talking about within ourselves. There's a struggle. We have to let go of the old things that have been holding us back. If we are to truly implement the freedom that our words, our story, right? As Rumi said, don't let it just be a story. Our story can't just be a story. We have to put it into action. So Emmett Fox goes on to tell us, it's still unfolding. It's still unfolding to this day. You can see in our own history in this country that, some 75 years later or 85 years later, whichever it was, we fought the Civil War, which was bringing into the unfoldment and bringing into expression a greater idea of we the people, a greater idea of who all these people were that were created equally. And then, maybe another 70 or 80 years went by and women's suffrage came in and finally was, and women should be able to vote because they're equal too. And we're starting to see, I think, as I mentioned last week, we're starting to move into a new phase now where inequality, however it exists, wherever it exists, is now being called out, is now being called for what it is. All persons are created equal. So I want you to think of this as an unfoldment of consciousness that started long before the United States of America came to be, but the time and the place were perfect for it to express as the Declaration of Independence, and then it continued on, you see, then it continued on. After the American Revolution, you had the French Revolution, and then after the French Revolution, we moved on to World War I, which started to completely tear down this system of feudalism. Right? Other people said, we don't have to be ruled by empires. We can rule ourselves. And this idea is still unfolding. But to put it into spiritual terms of the self, right? Not just politics, it's interesting to look at that and say, there's a bigger picture here. There's a bigger picture of human consciousnesses unfolding, and we can see how it is unfolding through historical events. And then we have to come back and say, but what does that mean to me? What does that mean to me as a spiritual individual? And what it means to me, what I invite you to consider this week, is that freedom, independence, power to do what needs to be done, all of these things are principles of God that already exist. They are already here. We can look through the telescope and we can see them. The mind that created the heavens is the same mind that is within you and I. The power that created the heavens is the same power that is within you and I. But what we must do, see, just as human consciousness had to advance to the point where it could understand the electricity that already existed, just as human consciousness had to evolve until it could understand and figure out how to implement the ideas of self-governance and freedom and independence, you and I must develop our consciousness. This is why Troward said, evolution can't take us any further. The next step in the fifth kingdom is up to us. You and I must do the one thing that we have been created to do, that as far as we know, no other creature can do. And that is, we must choose for ourselves. We must take control of our thoughts. So in the Declaration of Independence, the people here were putting off the old ways of the old kingdom in England and declaring the right to choose for themselves. And you and I must realize that no one else can do this for us. We must step into the role of self-governance. We must choose for ourselves what we want to have happen. We can't just get up in the morning and let the day take us wherever it will go. I mean, we can do that, but we won't be evolving. But the evolution will come quicker when we realize that my life is an outcome of my choices. Not only on a physical level, not only on a psychological level, but on a spiritual level. That which I choose, that which I decide, that which I believe, there's a power in the universe that makes the way straight for me, that opens the doors that would otherwise be closed. So today is the day of your Declaration of Independence. Are you ready to accept your independence? And are you ready to do what needs to be done in order to let that unfold through you? I mean, not just say, hey, I'm free and I can choose and I can decide and I can do what I want. What are you prepared to do? What are you prepared to do? The founding fathers, the people who signed that declaration, they were prepared to sacrifice their human lives in order to see this idea unfold. Nobody's asking you to do that. You don't have to do that. But you must move your feet. You must get into action. You must say, well, I am free. Well, if you are free to do what? Well, I am free to choose. Well, how often do you really choose? We practice mindfulness as a way of helping us to develop the discipline to be aware, just to be aware of what's going on. Because once we become aware of what is going on, then we can choose differently. We can make a different choice. The unfoldment of human consciousness that emerged at a point in time as the Declaration of Independence, that unfoldment is continuing as you and I. And just as it found a receptive group of people in those we call the Founding Fathers, you and I are a receptive person to this idea of spiritual freedom. We must continue to develop that idea. We must continue to develop the capacity to work with that idea. And the way that we do that is through our spiritual practice. We make a conscious decision about how we will express life this day. We set that in the form of an affirmative prayer. We sit and meditate so that we can be at home with the beloved, and then we get up and move our feet. Then we get up and move our feet. What would have happened if a couple hundred years ago, if those individuals just signed that piece of paper and then went back to their stores and their farms? Nothing, nothing, nothing. We know that we are the love of God in action. We know that the love of God is perfect freedom and perfect independence. We declare our intention to accept it, and now we must act as if. We must act as if. You have the tools. We've been going over the tools for years. You have the tools. Now I'm going to ask, are you willing to accept your freedom? Are you willing to accept your independence? And are you willing to do what needs to be done to let go of the old beliefs so that the new paradigm, the new mythology, the new independence can flow through you? And through you as a blessing to the world. Through you as a blessing to others. Just as the American Revolution kind of was a symbol of success that led other peoples to go out to declare their freedom, as you and I declare our freedom, but not just declare it, as you and I declare it and implement it and execute it, this too will be a blessing to the world. So you are the light. You are the light of the world. Take your bushel basket off your head and get busy. Get busy. I invite you to find that little booklet, The Manifest Destiny of the United States of America by Emmett Fox. It's $1 on the internet. A buck well spent. Download it, go someplace quiet, sit and read it. But recognize that you as an individual are a point where God is expressing its freedom, but can only do so to the degree that you accept and implement. So let this be the day, and so it is.